Hello, this is George from George's Music Blog, and today I'm talking about I Care Because You Do by Aphex Twin. I Care Because You Do was released on Warp Records, by this point established as the home for all releases under Richard D. James's Aphex Twin alias, and came out in 1995, a year after the legendary ambient double album Selected Ambient Works Volume 2. There are dates appended to each track where they're listed in the album sleeve, which suggests this is a compilation of material that in some cases was up to 5 years old. But I Care Because You Do sounds so fully realised and contained in its own weird sound world, I find it hard to believe it was put together in that way. More Aphex mind games perhaps? Who knows? It is also the first release to feature that grinning Fizzog, which in all its mutated, twisted forms would become Aphex's emblem and calling card, along with the iconic logo, of course. Now, my take. I have said elsewhere previously that I Care Because You Do was the best album Aphex had released by this point in his career. Since then, though, I've found myself listening to Saw 85 to 92 a lot more, so now I'm questioning that verdict slightly. But ultimately, if I had to choose, and at some point I will put together a video ranking all his albums, because this is the internet after all, I would probably still peg this one a bit higher. On Saw 2, Aphex truly entered his own musical realm, crafting something so otherworldly and alien it defied description. I Care Because You Do sees him touching back down to earth slightly, but certainly a huge distance from where he left off, and a fair way from anyone else making electronic music at that time. There's so much to get into on this record. Everything is permeated with this richly organic, earthy feeling, like the texture of lichen-speckled rocks, gritty soil and rusted metal, as if he recorded these tracks and then buried them down a Cornish tin mine for a few decades. The album's beauty lies in the counterpoint between the hard and soft edges, jagged percussion and soothing spectral melodies, screeching clamour and woozy respite. Now, let's start at the harder end of the spectrum with tracks like Come On You Slags and Start As You Mean To Go On. According to the dates on the sleeve, Come On You Slags is apparently one of the oldest tracks here. The beat in particular does sound like Aphex circa 1990, with that loose, breaky kind of tribal feel, rather than the pulsing metronome of standard techno. It's got these delightfully tense and anxiety-inducing chords, are they chords? Whatever, and a sample from an old film called Sekka's Fantasies, which I think is basically a porn film from the 1980s. The sample is essentially a conversation between two women in which one tells the other that she's going to give her a coming out party, to which the other replies, "A coming out party is not my idea of a fantasy." But the way it's treated in the track makes it sound far more tense and sinister than the original dialogue, which I've only just recently listened to and can of course be found online. But the effects James applies give it an atmosphere of a horror film rather than what appears to be a fairly prosaic conversation, although I have not sat through to watch the entire film, I should say. The B-movie horror vibe and the manic tempo make this track a little bit of an outlier on the album, but as is always nearly the case with Aphex, there is more going on with these spacey, eerie pads high above the mix. Taken in isolation, they would sound like something from Saw 2, and in this context they cast this eerie, spooky glow over everything. Then you get Rich's voice, I assume, croaking out, "Come on, you slags," in a voice that sounds demented and demonic, but with the humour of a puerile schoolboy. Separating out all these components, as I've just done, makes it sound bizarre, which of course it is in a way, but it is also still a banger. Now, a lot of people probably find Start As You Mean To Go On quite harsh on the ears with the metallic sounds and heavy distortion, but I've listened to this whole record so many times and it's such a familiar track to me that it never seems to irritate my ears or rub me up the wrong way. The predominant element is this incredibly metallic percussion, sounds that feel like they're literally made from metal, and an equally vivid sense that much of the track was created live, with James manipulating the sounds in real time. You can almost see him twisting a knob back and forth, opening and closing the filter, moving from deep, muffled thumps into crisper, sharper textures. It gives the track a very physical presence, that's the best way I can describe it. But then again, you've got that spacey, serene, almost melodic layer of pads drifting above the mix. I think that's why I don't find it oppressive or abrasive. Same as on Wax the Nip, which has similarly harsh beats and spectral melody. The extra atmosphere has that effect of just elevating the whole composition. Now let's move on to the harshest track of all and the most notorious on I Care Because You Do, Ventolin. Named after the asthma medication, I'm sure I've read somewhere that the high-pitched shrill squeal is meant to mimic the internal sound that some people hear when experiencing an asthma attack, and it is easy to understand why some people would find that anxiety-inducing. The beat itself is punishing. Again, it has this very metallic sound to it and a gut-punching stop-start staccato rhythm paired with that piercing whine. I expect many people struggle to listen to Ventolin for that reason alone. There's also a striking lack of melody or any kind of lift, nothing to elevate the track, and the rhythm never seems to resolve itself into any sort of satisfying forward motion. And for me, it just doesn't have that interesting sense of experimentation as some of the other tracks. It just feels a bit more aimless almost. So while I don't hate it with the visceral intensity that some people do, it is probably my least favourite track on the album. I won't skip it if I'm going in committed for a full listen, but if I'm going to skip anything, it would be this one. On the opposite end of the spectrum is Alberton Balsam, one of Aphex Twin's most beloved tracks, and for very good reason. The melody is unashamedly pretty, gentle, slightly melancholy, but open-ended enough that you can project your own feelings or story onto it. And it comes with a perfect sense of resolution in the final section of the track. In my mind, it always feels as though whatever scene has been shown on the stage of your imagination or whatever story has been told, it has all been neatly tidied away again at the end of the song. We also have that classic Aphex juxtaposition, the presence of cold metallic percussion with melodic warmth. Maybe it's because these sounds are so familiar and so everyday. Someone tapping a piece of metal on a radiator pipe, the scraping of a heavy chair across a hard floor. Even if the timbre is harsh, that grounded physical quality makes them so comforting and makes the beauty of the melody feel even more poignant. Are there any Aphex fans out there who don't like this track? I'd be interested to know. Now I have to mention two of the album's spookier pieces. First, Ist Hedral, which was later famously orchestrated by Philip Glass and included on the Donkey Rhubarb EP. Glass's version is remarkably faithful to the original, so much so that if it was playing in the background, you probably wouldn't immediately realise it was a different recording. I doubt Aphex imagined this one day being played by an orchestra when he composed it, but it certainly speaks to the depth and clarity of the material. The piece feels like it's been lifted straight from a horror film, bleak, tense, emotionally high stakes. I would call it delightfully bleak too, though, as well, because although the emotional palette is dark, it is also searingly beautiful and goes to some really deep, dark territory in my imagination. The other spooky highlight is the album's closer, Next Heap With, which is built from long, drawn-out organ tones that create this deliciously sinister atmosphere. There's something queasy and unsettling at its core, but also a hint of that mischievous, malevolent humour Aphex often sneaks into his music, which keeps it from tipping into just pure terror. Similar vibes-wise for me to Logan Rock Witch, which closes out the Richard D. James album. Now, of course, I have to mention Acrid Avid Jam Shred, the album's opener, because it is one of my all-time favourite Aphex tracks. I find it hard to define, not because the composition is strange as such, there's just something monolithic and impassive about it. The mid-tempo beat is unassuming enough in itself, but there's something in the timbre, is that the right word? The timbre of the drum sounds that is so inviting. They're so warm and crisp. I can almost feel it in my fingertips, if you know what I mean. The melody comes in very gradually, not until after a whole minute has passed, and has this gloriously expansive, uplifting quality. But again, there's something monolithic about it. Just these stately pairs of chords that sit over everything like clouds on a sunny day. Then, a few minutes in, Rich starts playing with this pitch bend effect and introduces a counterpoint to the original melody, which gives the whole mix this sense of lulling, rocking motion. Anyway, I could go on and on about this track. Like most of the rest of the album, it exists in its own musical universe to me. Earthy, organic, quietly unique, grounded, warm, and weirdly outside of time. Final reflections. Okay, I Care Because You Do is kind of an odd fish in the Aphex discography, sandwiched between much better known albums, the sprawling and impenetrable Selected Ambient Works Volume 2, which does have more renown, despite being, in my view, a much weirder and more inaccessible record. And at the other end of the musical spectrum, the punchier and much more accessible Rich D. James album. It's also noteworthy for being the last album he recorded using solely analog hardware, which I'm sure adds that very physical and textured feeling. But how do you like it? Which are your favourite tracks? I know I didn't mention the Wax and Pith, Wet Tip Hen Axe, Boo Kid or Cowcud is a Twin, and don't get me wrong, I love all those just as much. Are people still listening to this in 2026? I'm sure you are. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Please check out my channel for more Aphex Twin deep dives and electronic music reviews. And until next time, goodbye.